Hey guys, so as previously mentioned, I'm starting 5 new series on this channel. Hopefully, you've already seen the one called Give Them Roses. This one is called Changing the Game. Essentially, we'll be taking a look at ways coaches, players, NBA executives, or maybe even fans or anyone has changed the game. Whether it be in an indirect or direct way, or positive or negative. I'm going to try and keep it to lesser known players to keep it exciting, because videos like how Curry revolutionized 3 points in the NBA has been done a million times. So today, we're going to look at a very old player and old rule change, and how it basically created the game we know today. Again, these videos won't necessarily be about rule changes, and may be about more indirect ways the league has been impacted. But I thought this would be a good starting point for the first video. So let's get started with the man literally called Mr. Basketball. When I said we would discuss an old player, I meant it. George Mikan, or Mr. Basketball, played in the 40s, literally in the first few years the NBA was founded. During this time, Mikan played for the Lakers that were actually located in Minneapolis. Now, a lot of people like to hate on the early years of the NBA, saying things like certain players dominated because the competition was firefighters and plumbers. Well, this is actually exactly where this video is headed. George Mikan was a very tall player, even by today's standards, with the average height of today being about 6'6" and the average height of the 1940s being between 6'3" and 6'4". George Mikan, though, stood at a staggering 6'10" and 250 pounds. This meant he was essentially this era's Shaq or Wemby. Anytime he had the ball, he was going to reach over you and score it. If you look at the limited amount of highlights that exist at the time, you can see similarities between his shot reaching over people and Kareem's skyhook, just lobbing it over defenders for an easy bucket. Mikan was so dominant with this that he led the league in scoring for 6 years, with his career high being almost 30 points per game. This type of play is still being used by a lot of big men in the league today, as it helped define the big man role, using his body as a giant to overpower the quicker and smaller players. He was able to rebound, block, and shoot over people remarkably as an icon, which obviously still remains the main responsibility of centers today.
When you talk about the greats of basketball, you got to think about George Mikan.
Mr. Basketball, how'd you make no limits? What if you stopped when they say you were too big to play? That would have been a giant mistake, wouldn't it? If basketball had never been ruled by giants. No banging bodies, no feeding the big man, no attacking the basket. Instead, you made basketball bigger. Made spectacles a spectacle. You made me, me. And now, because of you, there's no limits of where we can play. Thank you, George.
Again, even today, centers and other players practice using the Mikan Drill. The drill consists of staying under the rim and shooting layups from either side and catching it repeatedly. This drill is meant to build rebounding, speed, versatility on either side of the basket, and efficiency in the paint. So if Mikan was so dominant, what was the solution to stop him? Well, simply make sure he didn't get the ball at all. Have you ever seen a sparring or boxing match where somebody plays conservatively? They hit somebody a few times for points and then just play defense, running around and blocking all the incoming attacks to prevent their opponent from getting any points? Well, that was basically the strategy when playing against Mikan. Teams would try and get a lead and then simply hold on to the ball for the entirety rest of the game. As you would imagine, this was pretty boring. Nowadays, basketball is a fast-paced game. People are on edge of their seats as players continuously compete back and forth and lead changes frequently. Before, this was not the case. In 1940, the Fort Wayne Pistons beat the Lakers using the strategy of stalling the game as long as possible. What was the score? 19-18. Yeah. But in order to make money and keep basketball as a relevant sport, they needed spectators, patrons, and entertainment. So to start preventing this, the NBA created one of the most important rules in the NBA, the shot clock. Just like how you can get a delay of game in the NFL or other sports, the NBA would now finally have a penalty for not continuing the play after an extended amount of time. As this was the only way to keep the ball away from Mikan. Following the rule change, the Lakers would go on to win 3 championships with him from 1952 to 1954. On top of this, Mikan's height and wingspan meant that he could also help a lot of his teammates miss shots go in, hitting them or catching them as they were on the pass to miss in order to redirect them to the basket, like an unintentional alley-oop. This meant that Mikan helped contribute to yet another rule. In 1944, the NCAA created the offensive goaltending rule to stop this type of play. The NBA later adopted it, preventing players from messing with the ball on its downward trajectory, just as Mikan had done many times before.
The goaltending rule came in because I used to goaltend, go up and stop the ball from going in the hoop. I could jump high enough to stop it, whether it be offense or defense. And guys like Adolph Rupp, Joe Lopchick again, and a whole bunch of them didn't like that rule. And they didn't have anyone around that could do that, so they legislated that you cannot hit the ball or touch the ball on its downward descent to the hoop.
Now this is only 2 out of the 3 rules Mikan contributed to. That's right, Mikan not only created the goaltending and shot clock, but another rule. In the NBA, you cannot stay in the paint for more than 3 seconds. This was already made to prevent players like Mikan from just standing under the basket the entire game, waiting for the ball in order to score. So when Mikan kept scoring in the paint, what could they do? Well, rather than shortening the amount of time that someone could be in the paint, they instead made the paint bigger. That way, Mikan was essentially forced to be further away from the basket in fear of a 3-second violation. The paint was extended from 6 feet to 12 feet, causing Mikan's rebounding and shooting to decrease. Later, Wilt Chamberlain would be another dominant player that would basically exploit the exact same weaknesses of other players with his similar strengths. So the NBA would extend the paint again to 16 feet. So to recap, Mikan was so dominant with his size in the early years of the NBA because he was so overpowering. Other teams would simply stall, which was not exciting for the viewers. So in order to keep basketball entertaining, the league had to introduce not just 1, but 3 new rules in order to help thwart and hinder Mikan. This made the games much more exciting and eventful and higher scoring, keeping Mikan from simply just staying in the paint. Mikan's rules and playstyle are still used or have their derivatives seen in today's NBA. And so that's how George Mikan changed the game.